A few months ago, I predicted that in reality, Panther Lake was a Strix Halo competitor, at least when it comes to price, not a Strix Point competitor. And therefore, it would need to perform at least similarly to Strix Halo, while of course also simultaneously giving you better features or better efficiency, a reason to get this over AMD's 1 year old flagship APU. And, like I covered earlier this week, at least the 12xe core iGPU models succeeded in doing this. They do trade blows with Strix Halo at lower power levels, although they don't always win, and they certainly lose once you get above 35 watts, but still, in return, at those power levels, you get better features and far better efficiency, allowing Panther Lake to confidently carve out its own performance niche in 2026 laptops, which is awesome that Intel is bringing competition to AMD, or at least better competition than they have been in recent times. However, as nice as that was to see, Just Josh tentatively confirmed the other thing that I did predict, that pricing should be much higher than Strix and Gorgon Point, making it a de facto Halo competitor not just in performance, but also in the cost to manufacture it. And today, well, I have further input from OEM and retail sources that confirms this thing, that Panther Lake is pricey. Like, really pricey. And so let me get straight to the point and tell you what you should expect in the laptop landscape this year. And by the way, there's only going to be one quote on screen near the end of this section because, well, most of my sources were really squirrely about being quoted, as Intel and their partners are super sensitive about pricing controversies this year, for obvious reasons. But anyways, the gist of the information is that the pricing I have seen for Panther Lake behind the scenes is between $1,400 and $2,400 for at least the models with a powerful 12xe iGPU. In fact, one retailer had the average pricing at Panther Lake laptops at around $2,100. And in the case of the good iGPU models that were cheaper, so the ones again that have 12xe cores and perform like what you saw on screen earlier, trading blows with Panther Lake at low power, those models were usually the Ultra X7s, not the Ultra X9s. And so their performance, well, it is a bit lower. It's probably about 6% lower single threading, 10% lower multi-threading, and therefore not faster than Gorgon Point. In fact, in multi-threading, probably weaker than both Gorgon and Strix Point. And look, I can only ever see part of a picture. I haven't talked to every single major retailer, nor every person at every OEM, right? But the point is that when you see articles like this that suggest Panther Lake can easily be $1,000 or something, this is not for the top model. And in fact, in the case of this $1,000 laptop, that's a 4xe model, a third the iGPU of the top models that everyone's really excited about right now. And I reached out to someone behind the scenes who's testing these Panther Lake laptops and confirmed that the obvious is true of this model. The 4xe Panther Lake model is less than half the performance in graphics. And some benchmarks can approach what you would expect, about a third the performance, meaning that it will probably lose to not even just Gorgon Point in integrated graphics, but possibly Strix Point as well. And so, again, look, I would still probably choose Panther Lake in that scenario for its way superior efficiency, but you just need to be informed about the landscape and what it's actually going to look like. Yes, Intel has a great product here with Panther Lake, but it isn't going to be a cheap one, especially not a cheap one for the best variants. In fact, one reason I was willing to move forward with this information that I got from retailers was that, well, one OEM was willing to be quoted to me. This person said, and let me put this on screen, that supply on Panther Lake is very tight for them. It costs a lot more than Lunar Lake, and its kits that they've gotten have inflated RAM prices as well. So it's not just that the CPU costs a lot more than the CPU of Lunar Lake, but then they also have to buy RAM separately for it, and that RAM costs way more than the RAM that came with Lunar Lake. As such, consumers should expect this to be near Strix Halo in terms of actual laptop pricing for the best models. And if they want to save money, this person's advice was to get Lunar Lake laptops through most of 2026. In fact, this OEM went on to say that at least their company stockpiled a ton of Lunar Lake APUs that came with bundled cheap memory from 2025. So they saw the RAM apocalypse coming. They stockpiled Lunar Lake because it already had the RAM on die and bundled with it. And that's their strategic reserve, I was told, that they will be able to give out at reasonable prices throughout this this year. In fact, it might even be cheaper to get Lunar Lake laptops than Gorgon Point, possibly a lot cheaper. And so, there you go. Like I said, that last quote from an OEM is the reason I was willing to move forward with this Panther Lake pricing leak today. You know, I can talk to a couple retailers, even some major ones, and I can get the average Panther Lake pricing behind the scenes before launch, but you always have the chance that maybe they just got the more pricier models early, that cheaper ones could pop up later, that other retailers have a better selection of the cheaper models. You never know for sure. But what I do know for sure after talking with an OEM is that they know that Panther Lake costs way more than Lunar Lake and a lot more than Gorgon Point. And so, to some degree, it just has to be true that Panther Lake laptops, at least the high quality, most fully featured ones, are probably going to be priced closer to Strix and soon Gorgon Halo, which I believe leaves an opening for AMD, and that is what I'm going to want to talk about now in this video, in addition to giving you an update on what's going on with Nvidia's N1X APUs. But first, an ad from a sponsor. Tired of getting hit in the face by unfair prices from Microsoft software? Well, you don't need to deal with that anymore. Start off 2026 right by going to CDkeyoffer.com. That's right, this piece of content is once again sponsored by a sponsor that has been a supporter of Moore's Law is Dead for almost the entire channel's life, CDkeyoffer.com. And I've been partnering with them for this long because they just give gamers something that I think they need to have. Fair pricing on Microsoft Windows and Office products. And in fact, if you go down to the description, you can click on the links there to support the channel by checking out their products, but then also support the channel further if you use offer code BROKENSILICON to save yourself an additional 25% on all Microsoft software. And there's also Die Shrink to save 3% off everything else on the website. Once again, I'm very happy to be working with CDkeyoffer.com another year of this channel's life, and I hope you'll show support to a company that supports this channel, CDkeyoffer.com. All right. Let's get now to how I think AMD should and could respond to Intel if they wanted to be more aggressive than they were initially planning to be this year, which I think they should change their plans because Panther Lake, even if it's pricey, it's a real winner for Intel, and it's one that could erode the momentum AMD's been building in laptop, momentum that's taken AMD a decade to get to, which don't forget, right now, Intel is still 2/3 of the x86 market and still nearly 80% of the laptop market. It has taken a long time for AMD to even claw their way to like 20% or higher in laptop. And if they just were lazy this year and lost all that momentum, that'd be quite a mistake. I mean, seriously, AMD, wake the up. Why does Gorgon Point not have RDNA 4? Why are you being so lazy this year, the year where Intel's actually firing back pretty hard? I don't think just saying AI justifies it. I think AMD probably fundamentally underestimated Panther Lake because Intel screwed up a lot of the recent launches, and well, you just can't do that, AMD. So it's time to make some changes. And what changes could they make? Well, I think there's one of two things they really need to do, and ideally they will actually do both of these things. So the first thing is, well, AMD needs to stop dragging their feet on Zen 6 APUs. Now, look, I'm sure there's a lot of people that say, oh, well, they can't be ready yet because of blah, 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 2 nanometer. And look, I've already covered that TSMC N2X seems to have been delayed, and that's why desktop Zen 6 might get delayed. And I've also been made aware, of course, I've leaked this, that the Venice EPYC server chips, which AMD will want to reserve for AI, yes, those will use N2P and therefore will be able to launch this year, but I'm sure AMD wants to reserve the N2P CCDs for their AI customers and not waste them, on laptop this year. Even if that was the case, that AMD didn't want to use any of their 2 nanometer capacity this year for client laptop, they don't need to be able to fire back at Intel and fire back hard, right? Remember, the core of Zen 6 APUs are built on 3 nanometer. The 2 nanometer chiplets are just bonus core increases. Now, if you're someone who doesn't know what I'm talking about here, well, what do you mean there's 3 nanometer Zen 6 with bonus 2 nanometer cores? Watch the video of the thumbnail I'm showing on screen right now. Put a lot of effort into it. It explains how RDNA 5 and Zen 6 Medusa APUs work. You might be lost if you don't, so please watch that. But okay, if you just got back and watched that, hear me out. I don't think AMD needs those bonus 2 nanometer cores. I think just launching the 10 nanometer APU chiplets, ones that by themselves would be enough to really spank Panther Lake. I mean, think about what this lineup would look like, even without the bonus 2 nanometer extension, right? The bottom model would be a 10 core Zen 6 plus 8 CUs. That would definitely compete well or smoke budget Panther Lake APUs that only have 4 XC CUs or whatever, XC cores, whatever Intel calls them. Really the same thing as what AMD calls a CU. All right. Well, then above that, what about the high-end Panther Lake models that are probably going to be around $2,000 or being $2,000 laptops? Well, they would have still a 14-core Zen 6 plus 24 CU Medusa Halo Mini. That would probably bring 50% higher CPU performance over Gorgon Point, and also maybe get up to like double the integrated graphics performance, likely beating top Panther Lake at everything. And then above that, you could still launch a Medusa Halo without the bonus, again, 2 nanometer cores added on top. It would still have 14 Zen 6 cores, 12 of them being full Zen 6, no C there, and then 48 CUs of RDNA 5. This should bring, higher CPU performance than Gorgon Halo, especially in single threading, of course, and increase iGPU performance by probably 50 to 80%, even if LPDDR6 wasn't ready, right? Who cares? It can use LPDDR5X and a 256-bit bus. This would still smoke Intel's APUs at absolutely everything, probably even beat Nova Lake APUs at most things. And remember, these would be monolithic 3 nanometer designs that skip the advanced packaging costs that you would need to add a bridge die in the 2 nanometer. I think they would be able to compete with Panther Lake fairly well in price to performance, while having vastly better efficiency than what they have now and higher performance than Panther Lake. AMD, you gotta consider doing this. And really the only reason I would think they wouldn't do this is they don't think they'll have RDNA 5 drivers done in time to move up that capacity. But even them, they should still try to accelerate these as much as possible. I'm sure they could get some capacity from TSMC for this. They could get some decent drivers going if they've if they've done anything to make their Radeon teams competent by now, which I guess that's a real concern. But either way, this needs to be moved up. Even if they can't launch these things at the end of this year, I don't think it's enough to have like Zen 6 Medusa Point coming out Q2 next year or March next year, and then the Halo products at the end of the year. These should all be tried to move up at least into the first quarter of next year, if possible. And based on what I've seen of RDNA 5 manufacturing, that sounds more than plausible to me. All right, so that was option 1. What's option 2? Well, it has to do with what they have now, not what they could try to do in the future, and that means Gorgon Halo and Gorgon Point. Specifically with Gorgon Halo, I hope this thing doesn't wait until like Christmas time this year to launch. This thing is a tweaked version of Strix Halo, like 5 to 10% faster, but hopefully with some tweaks to make the memory controller far more efficient in the 20-watt region, which is what they need to compete with Panther Lake. If they could pull that off and actually move this up to late summer so it's firmly ready for back to school in bulk, they got to try to do that. And they also got to be aggressive with Gorgon Point pricing. Seriously, if you really think about it, Panther Lake's biggest advantage right now really isn't performance. It's just efficiency. If Gorgon Point were able to undercut the 4 XE core models and X7s, it would probably look pretty favorably in price performance. And if Gorgon Halo was priced at or below the flagship Panther Lake laptop, so instead of being like $3,000, Gorgon Halo laptops are more in the $1,500 to $2,200 range. And I think they could be, because I am told that Panther Lake probably costs more to produce than Strix and Gorgon Halo do. Well, then I think plenty of people would choose the clearly faster Gorgon Halo products or the cheaper Gorgon Point. And either way, I think really when it comes to option 1 with the Zen 6 acceleration, or option 2 with the being aggressive with Gorgon and moving things up, I think they should really do both, because again, it's taken AMD a decade to get to where they are now in laptop, and that's still only about 20% of the market. If AMD lets Intel just have the clearly most efficient lineup for an entire year, and one that is still priced pretty competitively against them without responding, I really think that they could shrink back down, and I don't know how long it would take for them to get back to where they are now again, which would ultimately not just be bad for AMD, it would be bad for consumers. Again, everyone likes to act like Intel is the underdog. They are not. They are 2/3 of the market. They are 80% of laptop. They are not the underdog, and if AMD slips, we're going to go right back to monopoly Intel land, and I just don't want to see that happen. And so AMD, wake up. You've been doing so well lately. What is going on here with this blind spot to Panther Lake? And, one more thing that I want to cover very quickly in this video, and it has to do with Nvidia's N1X APUs, which, from what I am hearing, look, I know that there's been these rumors out there recently that Nvidia's APUs could launch any minute now. And I've heard they still could launch at the end of Q1 this year, but I want to be clear. I reached out to people that are testing and working on N1X APUs, and even some people at OEMs, and from what I'm being told, this thing's probably slipping Q1. At least, I don't think it'll be in high volume this quarter if it does launch, and I even had one person suggest that it could slip to Q3, that there's just still, and I've said this on Broken Silicon many times, but just to reiterate here, tons and tons of bugs and issues with N1X, and that like Microsoft's dragging its feet properly supporting Nvidia's APUs and Windows, and that Nvidia just is not moving quickly enough to help finalize the software for this to work in a Windows laptop. So I don't know. I didn't put a quote on screen, and I'm not doubling down on anything here, and that's for a reason. I'm not 100% sure, but I just want to be clear. I had one person tell me this week that they think it could slip all the way to like August or something, and nobody thinks that it's coming out in like a week or two, or maybe even a month. If it does, that would really surprise everyone I've talked to. So still look at the Nvidia APUs as not quite being ready, and probably being more of a summer launch than an early 2026 launch. But, if any of that information changes, according to the people I've talked to, well, I'll put out another video and update you on that. That is going to do it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please make sure to like this video, to comment down below. I'm sure a lot of you have a lot of opinions about the things I said today. And then also to share it as well. And then also join the Moore's Law is Dead Patreon. If you do, you'll get access to tons of die shrinks. The lowest tier just got access to another one yesterday. We'll have another die shrink come out next week. We had two actually quite popular ones come out about the decline of the console market recently and what's going on with how people cover Nvidia. That's niche conversations that I know the biggest fans will love, but wouldn't get clicks probably on YouTube. And so, well, they're for the biggest supporters, because I know they'll be able to actually appreciate it. And then I don't have to worry about trying to make it get clicks for a niche subject. So please consider supporting Moore's Law is Dead at even just the $1 or $2 tier. And again, even at the lower tier, you'll also get able to ask guest questions. The next guest is Just Josh. I'll be recording with him tomorrow for Broken Silicon. If you join like right now, like within a few hours after the video comes out, your question could still be seen and heard on the episode. But for everybody else, no matter what, if you made it this far into the video, thank you for watching.